1907, in Alabama. The forgotten case of the doctor who tried to cure inbreeding by creating human hybrids. A story buried for over a century in the archives of American medical history. To the dense backwoods of rural Alabama, where isolation bred more than just community distrust, arrived a Harvard-educated physician named Dr. Malcolm Harrington, his ambition something that would horrify modern medical ethics. The year was 1907. The White House was occupied by President Theodore Roosevelt, and the Wright brothers were just beginning to perfect their flying machines. But time moved differently in the isolated valleys and hollers of northern Alabama. Generations of families had lived in seclusion, marrying among themselves, creating closed genetic pools that produced increasingly troubling results. In Coleman County, our story begins, where the Blackwood family had established themselves since before the Civil War. Over 3 generations of kin ruled the patriarch Jeremiah Blackwood, a family that rarely ventured beyond their 200-acre property. From 1900, census records show 27 Blackwoods living across 4 cabins, all descended from the original Jeremiah and his wife Martha, who had settled the land back in 1842. By 1907, the Blackwood family exhibited the unmistakable physical characteristics that local doctors recognized as the result of family unions. Common among the youngest generation were children born with underdeveloped limbs, facial asymmetry, and cognitive impairments. These cases had been documented by the local physician, Dr. Samuel Wilson, but he could offer little in terms of treatment or prevention beyond futile warnings against continued interfamilial relations. Enter Dr. Malcolm Harrington, a 43-year-old physician whose controversial theories on genetic purification had made him an outcast in Boston's medical community. He had studied under pioneers in the emerging field of genetics, but his radical ideas about genetic manipulation pushed beyond what even the most progressive scientists would entertain. Claiming to seek rural practice experience, Harrington arrived in Alabama, but his journals, discovered decades later, reveal a far more disturbing agenda. He had come to find a closed genetic community, a place where he could test his theories on hybrid vigor, the belief that introducing new genetic material could reverse generations of genetic decline. His unwitting subjects became the Blackwood family. Confuse. If you're already subscribed to this channel, you need to subscribe now to discover America's darkest medical secrets that have been deliberately erased from our history books. The truth is being revealed exclusively here. In March 1907, Dr. Harrington established a small medical practice in Coleman County. He was initially welcomed, according to local newspaper archives, as the only physician willing to treat the remote communities that other doctors avoided. What locals didn't know was that Harrington was meticulously documenting the physical characteristics of every family in a 50-mile radius, searching for evidence of what he called genetic deterioration. In the Blackwood lineage, I have encountered the most compelling case of genetic isolation, Harrington wrote in his private journals, recently discovered in a university archive. 3 generations of interfamilial unions have produced precisely the decline predicted by Mendel's theories. This family will prove the perfect test case, if my hypothesis about genetic restoration is correct. By providing free medical care, something the impoverished family had never received, Harrington gained the Blackwoods' trust. He treated chronic conditions, delivered babies, and became a regular visitor to their compound. The health conditions of all 27 family members were documented by him throughout the summer of 1907. His records describe Jeremiah Blackwood, then 87 years old, as surprisingly vigorous despite advanced age, while noting that his grandchildren and great-grandchildren showed increasing signs of what Harrington called genetic collapse. From various developmental disorders suffered the youngest generation, with several children unable to speak or walk properly. By autumn, from observer, Harrington had advanced to active participant in the Blackwoods' lives. He converted an abandoned church into what he called a health clinic, a place where he began conducting more invasive examinations of family members. Many procedures were performed without proper understanding or consent, suggest local historical accounts. How he began collecting biological samples from each family member is detailed in Harrington's journals, blood, hair, and other specimens that would be considered experimental even by 1907 standards. He was particularly interested in the reproductive health of the family, documenting fertility rates and pregnancy outcomes across generations. What makes this case particularly disturbing is Harrington's next step. Convinced that the Blackwood's genetic problems could be cured by introducing new genetic material, he began implementing what he called hereditary restoration therapy. The beginning of a profoundly unethical experiment was actually this innocuous-sounding treatment. "The application of my theories has begun," Harrington wrote in December 1907. "From the Blackwood line, I have selected 5 female subjects of childbearing age who exhibit the clearest signs of genetic decline. I believe their offspring will demonstrate dramatic improvement in physical and mental development through my interventions." What exactly these interventions entailed remained unclear until county medical records were uncovered decades later. Without their knowledge or consent, Harrington had begun manipulating the reproductive futures of the Blackwood women, implementing a program he believed would introduce superior genetic material into the family line. By spring 1908, the first results of Harrington's experiment had begun to appear. Within weeks of each other, 3 Blackwood women gave birth, events Harrington meticulously documented with an almost fanatical attention to detail. The infants, according to his notes, showed marked improvement in cranial formation and limb development compared to their siblings born years earlier. What the mothers didn't know was that a form of reproductive manipulation that violated every ethical standard even of that era, a euphemism for which was his genetic restoration program, had been systematically implemented by Harrington. That Harrington had secretly arranged for men from outside the community, men he believed possessed superior genetic qualities, to father children with Blackwood women was later revealed by court records from a later investigation. Through deliberate deception, this was done in some cases, in others, through methods that would certainly constitute crimes today. "I have seen the future of medicine," Harrington wrote in April 1908. "Through scientific intervention, the Blackwood line is being restored. None of the characteristics that plagued their relatives are shown by the infants. My theory of hybrid vigor is proving correct. If you're feeling outraged by Dr. Harrington's actions, type unethical experiment in the comments section. Your voice matters in condemning these historical atrocities and ensuring such medical violations never happen again." By summer 1908, Harrington's experiment had expanded. On Blackwood property, he had built a larger facility, ostensibly a modern medical clinic, but in reality a laboratory for his increasingly ambitious genetic manipulations. The unusual structure is mentioned in local newspaper accounts from the time, but they describe it as a charitable endeavor bringing modern medicine to an underserved community. Behind closed doors, Harrington was implementing the next phase of his experiment. That he began bringing additional women from other isolated communities to the Blackwood compound is indicated by historical records, creating what he called a controlled genetic environment. His goal was to create what he termed hybrid humans, children who would benefit from genetic diversity while maintaining what he considered desirable traits from the original Blackwood line. In his journals, Harrington shows no moral qualms about his actions. "A pioneer is how he viewed himself," writing, "Future generations will understand the necessity of my methods. Science will have a new path forward when the children of my program grow to adulthood without the afflictions that have plagued their relatives." The local community, however, had begun to notice strange occurrences at the Blackwood property. Suspicions were raised by the unusual number of pregnancies, the construction of the large medical facility, and the increasing seclusion of the family. By fall 1908, rumors had reached Coleman County officials. On October 17, 1908, to investigate reports of unusual activities, County Sheriff Thomas Reynolds and 2 deputies arrived at the Blackwood compound. The conscience of the entire state would be shocked by what they discovered. The findings are detailed in court documents from November 1908. Into a full medical facility with equipment sourced from as far away as Chicago and New York, Harrington had converted the former church building. Inside were 15 women, 8 Blackwoods and 7 from other communities, all in various stages of pregnancy. More disturbing were Harrington's records, which explicitly detailed his genetic restoration program. The sheriff immediately arrested Harrington and contacted state authorities. When news reached Montgomery, the governor ordered a full investigation. On October 23, 1908, the Birmingham Age Herald newspaper ran the headline, "Doctor's House of Horrors Discovered in Coleman County." The article described unspeakable experiments conducted on vulnerable women and called it a scandal that will shock the nation. However, within days, coverage mysteriously diminished and ultimately disappeared from newspapers. That powerful interests intervened to suppress the story is suggested by evidence uncovered by historical researchers. Harrington had connections to influential medical societies and wealthy patrons interested in the emerging field of eugenics, the now discredited belief that humanity could be improved through selective breeding. Court records show that Harrington was initially charged with multiple crimes, including various forms of impropriety and practicing medicine in an unethical manner. However, before his case could go to trial, he was committed to the Alabama State Hospital for the Insane in Tuscaloosa. Effectively silencing him and preventing public testimony about his experiments was this convenient diagnosis. Scattered to various institutions and hospitals across the state were the women and children from the compound. Incomplete are the records of their fates, but documents from the Alabama Department of Public Welfare indicate that several children born under Harrington's program were placed in specialized medical facilities due to unusual developmental characteristics. Children with atypical physical development and accelerated cognitive abilities paired with physical abnormalities are described in medical records from these institutions. Disturbingly well with what Harrington had aimed to create do these clinical notes align, human beings with what he considered selectively advantageous traits. By 1910, officials had dismantled Harrington's facility and dispersed the Blackwood family across several counties, effectively erasing their community. Their property was purchased by a timber company, land records show, with connections to one of Harrington's former medical colleagues from Boston. The entire incident might have remained buried forever if not for the chance discovery of Harrington's journals in 1978, hidden in a collection of medical papers donated to Vanderbilt University. The full horror of his experiments was revealed by these writings, and they raised disturbing questions about why his case was so thoroughly suppressed. Far beyond the hills of Coleman County extends the legacy of Dr. Malcolm Harrington's experiments. That data from his unethical program may have influenced early genetic research in America is suggested by evidence uncovered by historical researchers. In 1912, while Harrington remained institutionalized, a paper titled "Hereditary Restoration in Isolated Populations" appeared in a medical journal. Though attributed to Dr. William Foster of Johns Hopkins University, the methodology described bears striking similarities to Harrington's work. Prominent in the American eugenics movement, which promoted genetic improvement through selective breeding and forced sterilization of those deemed unfit, Foster later became. Through medical records until approximately 1930, the children produced through Harrington's program were tracked, after which most documentation disappears. Individuals with unusual combinations of physical and mental characteristics are described in the few records that survive, some showing cognitive abilities far above average paired with distinctive physical features. Patient J.B., age 19, exhibits remarkable mathematical abilities and perfect recall, but suffers from pronounced skeletal abnormalities consistent with accelerated growth, notes one account from a physician at a Birmingham medical facility in 1927. Patient reports being born in northern Alabama as part of a special medical program. One of the last documented survivors of Harrington's experiment is believed to be this patient. From historical record after 1910, the Blackwood family itself vanished. Across the Southeast, genealogical researchers have found scattered descendants, many of whom have no knowledge of their connection to this dark chapter in medical history. As for Dr. Malcolm Harrington, he died at the Alabama State Hospital in 1919. Largely forgotten until the discovery of his journals decades later were his theories. That he continued to insist on the validity of his research until his death is indicated by hospital records, writing extensive notes that were confiscated and presumably destroyed by hospital authorities. One of the darkest chapters in American medical history is represented by the case of Malcolm Harrington. A chapter deliberately erased from textbooks and official records. His work predated the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study and Nazi eugenics programs, yet remains largely unknown to the general public. Why was this case so thoroughly suppressed? That Harrington's connections to prominent medical institutions and wealthy patrons led to a coordinated effort to protect the reputation of American medicine is suggested by some historians. To the emerging eugenics movement, which would not have wanted public exposure of its most extreme applications, point others. The rural location, the vulnerability of the victims, and the era's limited communication channels all facilitated the near-complete burial of this story. Effectively erased from history were the Blackwoods, already isolated by geography and social standing. As we reckon with historical medical abuses and ethical violations today, the Harrington case serves as a powerful reminder of medicine's potential for harm when divorced from basic human ethics. It raises disturbing questions about what other historical atrocities remain undiscovered or deliberately concealed. If you watched all the way through, it's because you were captivated by this dark chapter in American history. Leave a comment saying, "I watched the whole thing," so I can get to know you and identify who truly appreciates the hidden stories on this channel. Subscribe now to uncover more shocking historical cases that have been deliberately erased from our textbooks. Like and share this video to help expose the uncomfortable truths about our medical past that powerful institutions would prefer we forget. The Harrington case may have been forgotten for decades, but through careful historical research and the courage to face uncomfortable truths, we ensure that the victims of such atrocities are finally acknowledged. Their story, though horrific, must be told so that such violations are never repeated.